debate entitled Rural Banking Services, and I call Faye Jones to propose it.
Thank you, Mr Gray. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship this morning. I beg to move that this House has considered rural banking services, and I'm very grateful for other members attending today's debate. It's hot outside, but there's no reason it should be hot in here. This does not need to be a divisive debate at all. I very much hope that we can talk about the positives and the negatives of this issue. I want to cover both the availability of cash and the importance of banking infrastructure in rural areas. There is no doubt that the pandemic has forced businesses to adapt and accelerated a wider move towards digital payments. This is very much to be welcomed, and I really do want to thank businesses across the country who have bent over backwards and adapted their systems to ensure that they can provide a service to isolated or elderly customers. But I am concerned that this has implications for some members of society, particularly older and vulnerable people who are much more likely to use cash. Lower income households and those without internet access are likely to be the most affected. During the pandemic, cash use appears to have declined, often in constituencies with higher levels of deprivation. In my own constituency, cash withdrawals have dropped by 55% in the first 6 months of the pandemic. And in areas such as mine, where our broadband and mobile coverage is poor, cash is extremely important for rural businesses and individuals. I'm very grateful that the government is listening on this and is proactive, as I know the Minister will outline in his speech later on. But we have already made some good steps in this direction. In 2019, the Access to Cash Review highlighted the need for different government bodies and regulatory authorities to work together to protect access to cash. This was then followed with a commitment from the Chancellor in his budget to legislate to protect access to cash. And in April of this year, the government accepted an amendment to the Financial Services Bill which would allow consumers to withdraw cash back from more retailers without having to make a purchase. We have a real-life example of that amendment working really well in my constituency. I've been working with the Cwm-Tawe Access to Cash community group, a group of volunteers who have gathered together to focus on the problem of cash availability. I don't know if you know my constituency, Mr Gray, but Cwm-Tawe is a beautiful town. It has a wonderful culture of striking out on its own. In fact, in 1973, Richard Booth, who appointed himself the King of Hay, declared Hay an independent kingdom. So we didn't need to go through the Brexit referendum. It really was that easy. But as a result, it has a culture of fixing its own problems. And I really do want to commend the group of volunteers who have been organising this. They got together after the final bank left the town in 2018. At the same time, the Post Office has been going through some turbulent times after the postmaster, Mr Steve Like, stepped down from the business. And again, I do just want to thank Steve and his family. They have owned the post office in Cwm-Tawe for over 60 years. So it really was the end of an era when he stepped down in June. With these two pressures in mind, a group of volunteers led by Josh Green got together to tackle the issue of cash availability. And so as well as creating a scheme where customers from different banks can speak to their bank, a representative from their bank, in the parish hall one day a month, they've got together a large group of businesses who are now offering cash back after the government stepped forward with the change to the Financial Services Bill. So I really do want to celebrate what those volunteers have done. This is a real meaningful difference. And it proves just how important cash is.
And Rajashar for bringing this forward. My constituency is very similar to our own. We've had a number of bank closures. The latest one is Barclays and Newton are just 30 minutes away from Portabogie and Clocky in my constituency. They are closed, the options are away. Can I ask the Honourability, because you referred to it at the beginning, I agree that there's an important parallel between banking and broadband services, and more time, I believe, needs to be committed to improving internet services in rural communities to ensure that constituents can use online banking efficiently in addition to doing it in person. Doesn't suit everyone, but will suit a whole lot of people. The option needs to be there. Perhaps it's an opportunity for banks and broadband to work together. Thank you.
I would absolutely agree with the Honourable Member's intervention. I hope it's something that the Minister will cover during his summing up. As a beautiful constituency, we are one of the lowest in terms of broadband availability across the entire country. So these are twin track problems that we need to fix at the same time. Certainly will.
Thank you. Can I thank my honourable friend for bringing forward this debate? This is, she could well be describing Aberconway as beautiful, rural, trouble with broadband, and unfortunately the withdrawal of banking services. the experience of my constituency, and for example the residents of Llanrwst and small businesses, is that first of all they saw banking and counter services withdrawn from the town down the coast to Llandudno, and they were told they can travel to Llandudno. And now they're hearing that the counter services in Llandudno are closing with some banks and moving further along the coast. And these are areas which don't have the benefit of extensive public transport. So it is physically difficult to move from the valley to the coast.
Must be brief. Faye Jones.
Thank you.
Again, I completely agree with the Honourable Gentleman, Mr Gray. Issues that I will cover later in my speech, but these are common issues, and again shows the need why we all need to work together, not just the UK government, but obviously devolved administrations in Cardiff, Edinburgh and Northern Ireland. But it proves the point that cash is extremely important. Lloyd's Group talks about a group of 3 million cash-critical people, and these are not people that you would ordinarily expect. 41% of these group are aged between 35 and 54. They earn less than £20,000 a year. They often rent their home or they live in social housing. So these are not just the elderly, the vulnerable, those who live on their own. This is an extremely important group of society that we need to make sure has access to cash. So turning to my ask of government, as I've mentioned, the government has made some really positive steps towards addressing these challenges. And there is currently a consultation open on access to cash. The proposals include the Treasury granting powers to require certain firms, like retail banks, to provide deposit and withdrawal facilities for customers within certain distances. And the FCA would have oversight for monitoring and enforcing these requirements. I very much welcome this. These proposals suggest that the government is introducing a legal guarantee for consumers and businesses to be able to withdraw and access their cash. This is absolutely what we need, and I think the point about the certain distance is going to be critical for people in my constituency in Brecon and Radnorshire. We are the largest constituency in England and Wales. The constituency is bigger than Luxembourg, and I would urge the Minister to bear this in mind as the consultation goes forward. It's something that I will certainly be responding to, but it's imperative to remember that miles are not the same in urban areas as they are in rural areas. Now, Brecon has 4 banks. That is great news. But in Astragynllais, the largest town in my constituency by population, there is only 1. Bilthwells has 1. Hay-on-Wye, as I've said, has none. Crickhowell, none. Rhayader, none. Knighton, none. Since the mid-1990s, the number of bank branches in the UK has been falling steadily.
On that point,
Certainly.
I thank the Honourable Member for Brecon and Radnorshire for giving way my Welsh colleague, and she's making some important points on the importance of banking infrastructure. Loyal customers in my constituency of Pontypridd, whose life savings have been invested in banks, are being abandoned by these corporations who claim to serve the communities that they represent. Would the Honourable Member agree with me that it's completely wrong for banks to bail out of local communities like ours and across Wales, when just a few years ago they had to be bailed out by the public purse themselves?
I certainly do agree that it is wrong for banks to withdraw when there are no options left, and we need to be really, really careful. And I would implore the banks, and I have worked and spoken to a number of them in preparation for this debate, I would implore them to remember that we do need physical banking services, and you can't just push them down the line or rely on a certain urban area. But on that point, it has just been announced that Barclays Bank in my constituency in Llandrindod-Wells is about to close. And from my office in Llandod, I can see the amount of people who use that bank every day, and I really am quite surprised that this decision is going ahead. I understand it's too late to influence that, but I make the plea nonetheless. This will cause considerable problems for people in my constituency, those who live in Knighton or Prestine or further north. Again, I remind you, Mr Gray, it's the largest constituency in England and Wales. As much as this causes a headache for personal banking, there are businesses who are going to suffer, and I think it's really crucial we recognise the value of these rural businesses. Farmers rely on good relationships with their banks for very obvious reasons. It's often said that nobody knows how to spend money better than a farmer, and it's really important that we remember that that money gets filtered out right through the rural community. One farmer sustains hundreds of businesses in a rural area. You think of the vet, you think of the insurance agent, you think of the feed merchant, you think of the contractors that he will work with. So remembering that rural businesses need access to banking infrastructure is so important. So I really would urge the Minister to put some real teeth behind the proposal in the consultation for a right to withdraw cash. And again, remember that point about mileage, because some of my constituents who used to rely on Barclays Bank in Llandrindod-Wells are now going to need to travel 20 or 30 miles to get cash to pay their bills or to give a grandchild their birthday money. So it really is absolutely essential. The final point I would just make, Mr. Gray, is the importance of banks to the high street, because nobody just pops to the bank as a one-off transaction. You pop to the post office, you go into the butcher, you go for a coffee. These are important parts of a thriving high street. And again, I stress the importance of a high street to rural areas, particularly in Brecon and Radnorshire, where we don't have large urban conurbations, we don't have city centres. You know, our high streets are the lifeblood of a rural economy, and I think it's incredibly important that as we move things towards a purely digital platform, we remember the need for face-to-face contact. If the pandemic has demonstrated anything over the last 18 months, it's that we all need and cherish human interaction. And I think it's incredibly important we remember the impact that closures like this can have on mental health. Again, I think of the farmers in my constituency who take their cattle to market, and then while they're in Brecon Market, they go into the bank and they go into the high street. This is part of a chain, a very important rural chain, and when one link goes, so goes the rest of it. So I really do want the government to think about the closures, think about the impact that these closures can have. I know obviously we cannot control the commercial decisions that the retail banks make, but where we can, I believe we should be doing all we can to preserve rural communities, and remember that rural banking services are so crucial. We talk a lot in this place, and rightly so, about levelling up, but there can be no levelling up if we forget rural areas, and so I would urge the Minister to think about that. But I thank you, Mr. Gray, for your time today.